Someone get her a clipboard. The administrative staff is supposed to catalog the decorations after the party, not stand around like they're part of the command structure. The crowd of freshly minted lieutenants and sycophantic cadets laughed, a wave of nervous, eager sound that filled the polished wood and brass of the officers' club. Captain Decker, his new silver bars gleaming under the soft lights, gestured with his champagne flute toward the woman standing alone near the far wall. She was unremarkable, a ghost in a simple, unadorned duty uniform that bore no rank, no insignia, no story. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot, and her face was a placid mask of neutrality. She didn't react. Her gaze, which had been sweeping the room with a slow, methodical rhythm, did not so much as flicker in his direction. Her stillness was an act of profound defiance, a silence so complete it seemed to absorb the sound of their mockery. But when Colonel Matheson, the base commander, saw her stance from across the room, the subtle weight distribution, the perfect economy of posture, he felt a cold knot of recognition tighten in his gut. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type respect below. The woman, whose name no one in that room except the colonel even knew, simply shifted her weight from one foot to the other, a minute adjustment that went unnoticed by the celebrating mob. To them, she was a piece of the furniture, an administrative oversight, a target for the casual cruelty that often accompanies newfound, unearned authority. Captain Decker, basking in the glow of his promotion and the adulation of his subordinates, saw her as a perfect foil for his performance. He was the future of command, all bluster and polished leather, and she was the faceless bureaucracy he was destined to rise above. He continued his monologue, his voice dripping with condescension. Seriously, is this what we've come to? Letting the paper pushers mingle with the warfighters? No wonder our readiness scores are slipping. The cadets chuckled again, louder this time, feeding the captain's ego. They saw only what he told them to see, a plain, unassuming woman who didn't belong. They missed the details that would have screamed a warning to a more seasoned eye. They missed the way her hands rested at her sides, perfectly relaxed yet poised for immediate action. They missed the faint, faded line of a scar tracing her left temple, almost hidden by her hairline. They missed the watch on her wrist, a black, non-reflective chronometer with a face devoid of any brand, a piece of equipment that wasn't standard issue for any clerk in any branch on any planet. Her silence was not weakness. It was a carefully calibrated tool. It was a mirror, and in it, Captain Decker was showing his entire command his own glaring inadequacies. He mistook her calm for fear, her patience for subservience. He was making the most dangerous assumption a leader can make, that what you see is all there is. The object of his scorn simply took a slow, deliberate breath, her chest rising and falling in a steady, controlled cadence. Her focus remained unbroken, her expression unchanging. She was an island of professional composure in a sea of performative arrogance. For her, this was not a social event. It was an observation. She was gathering data, assessing personalities, cataloging weaknesses, and Decker was providing a wealth of information. His verbal barrage was a series of tactical errors, each one revealing more about his character than hers. He spoke of leadership, but demonstrated only vanity. He spoke of strength, but projected only insecurity. While the room filled with his empty words, her mind was a silent engine of analysis, processing the scene with a clarity that was almost terrifying. She cataloged the faces of the laughing cadets, not with malice, but with a dispassionate sense of disappointment. They were learning the wrong lessons from the wrong man. They were learning that authority was a weapon for personal aggrandizement, that respect was demanded through ridicule rather than earned through competence. The colonel, watching this disaster unfold, felt a growing sense of dread. He knew who she was, or at least, he knew what she represented. He had received the coded message only a week prior. A technical observer from Strategic Command would be on base for an unscheduled audit. The name provided was a generic placeholder. The rank was listed as civilian equivalent, and the clearance level was so high it was practically mythical. The instructions were simple and chilling. Provide unrestricted access and do not, under any circumstances, interfere. He had assumed the observer would be a gray-haired man in a suit, not this specter of a woman who seemed to command the very air around her through sheer force of will. He watched as Decker, emboldened by her non-reaction, took a half-step toward her, preparing to escalate his public humiliation. The colonel began to move, a silent prayer on his lips that he could intervene before the captain crossed a line from which there would be no professional return. He was about to witness a lesson in humility, one that would be etched into the very soul of his command for decades to come. The quiet woman was not being judged. She was the one conducting the judgment, and the verdict was already coming in. Suddenly, the warm, celebratory atmosphere of the club was shattered. A piercing, high-frequency alarm cut through the laughter, followed by the cold, synthetic voice of the base AI. Code Omega. Code Omega. All command personnel to Simulation Center, Level 4. This is not a drill. The lights in the officers' club shifted to a harsh, blood-red emergency glow. The champagne glasses stopped clinking. The smiles vanished, replaced by masks of confusion and alarm. A Code Omega was the stuff of legend, a doomsday scenario so complex that it had only ever been run twice in the base's history, and never as a surprise drill. It simulated a multi-front, cascading systems failure combined with a near-peer enemy offensive, a scenario designed to break even the most seasoned command teams. Captain Decker, caught mid-insult, froze. The swagger evaporated from his posture, replaced by a deer-in-the-headlights panic. This was his first real test since the new bars were pinned to his collar, and it was a nightmare. As officers scrambled for the exits, their movements frantic and disorganized, the quiet woman moved with an entirely different quality of energy. There was no rush, no panic. She flowed through the panicked crowd like a river navigating rocks, her movements fluid and efficient. She didn't run. She simply arrived at the door first. Her calm was an accusation, a stark contrast to the barely controlled chaos erupting around her. While Decker barked a series of contradictory, panicked orders. Someone get me a sit rep. Where's my command tablet? Form up. Form up. She was already halfway down the corridor, her stride long and purposeful. The colonel watched her go, a sense of awe mixing with his dread. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this was no coincidence. The drill hadn't just started, it had been initiated. And there was only one person on the base with the authority to trigger a Code Omega without his knowledge. He turned and saw Decker fumbling with his tablet, his face pale and slick with sweat. The lesson was about to begin. The simulation center was a cavern of controlled chaos. A massive holographic map dominated the central space, glowing with angry red icons that represented enemy units and cascading system failures. Technicians and officers shouted reports, their voices strained with stress as the simulated defense perimeter crumbled with terrifying speed. Sector Gamma is gone. EMP blast has knocked out our comms, one voice cried. They're through the firewalls. I'm losing control of the drone swarm, shouted another. The AI's voice droned on, announcing each new catastrophe with chilling neutrality. Aegis defense grid at 30%. Cascade failure imminent. Captain Decker stood before the main command console, utterly paralyzed. The sheer volume of data, the speed of the collapse, was more than he could process. His academy training was useless here. He issued a weak command to reinforce a flank that had already been vaporized, a move so tactically inept that the senior NCO, beside him, physically winced. It was in this moment of total command failure that the woman entered the room. She didn't announce herself. She simply appeared at the edge of the command floor, her eyes scanning the holographic display not with alarm, but with an unnerving look of detached analysis, like a master chess player examining a board. She walked past the paralyzed Captain Decker, ignoring him completely, and moved to a small, secondary diagnostics terminal in the corner, a station most officers considered obsolete. Her fingers danced across the keyboard. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. It was a display of pure, kinetic competence, a stark refutation of Decker's earlier jibe about her being a paper pusher. She wasn't typing words. She was writing code, inputting direct command line overrides into the simulation's core programming. The grizzled master sergeant in charge of the center watched her, his jaw slowly dropping. He saw her bypass 3 security layers with a string of code he didn't recognize. She wasn't fighting the simulation, she was rewriting its rules. She isolated the enemy's primary command and control node, not with a clumsy frontal assault, but by creating a recursive feedback loop in their own communications network. She turned their greatest strength, their networked warfare capability, into a fatal weakness. On the main screen, 1,000 red icons representing the enemy force began to blink, then flicker, then one by one, they went dark. A single message appeared in their place, stark white against the black background. Checkmate. Unknown protocol executed. Simulation terminated. A deafening silence fell over the room. Every eye turned from the board to the quiet woman in the plain uniform, who was now calmly wiping the screen of the terminal with the sleeve of her uniform. Colonel Matheson entered the now silent simulation center, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He walked past the stunned officers and the still frozen Captain Decker, his eyes fixed on the woman by the secondary console. He stopped a few feet from her, his expression a mixture of profound respect and sheer astonishment. He had seen masters of strategy in his 30-year career, but he had never seen anything like this. This wasn't tactics, it was artistry. This wasn't a victory, it was a dissection. He cleared his throat, and the sound made several people jump. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the full weight of his authority. Request permission to ask what protocol that was. The use of the honorific "ma'am" was a thunderclap in the silent room. Decker's head snapped up, his face a canvas of disbelief and confusion. He started to stammer. "Sir, she's just a clerk, she." Matheson silenced him with a glare so cold it could have frozen fire. The colonel turned back to the woman, who met his gaze for the first time. Her eyes were calm, intelligent, and held a depth that seemed to go on forever. "It's a failsafe," she said, her voice surprisingly soft, yet clear and steady. "A logic bomb I built into the simulation's core architecture. Code Omega isn't about winning. It's designed to be an unwinnable scenario. Its only purpose is to measure command response under catastrophic failure." The implication hung heavy in the air. Decker hadn't just failed a test. He had failed the only part of the test that mattered. Matheson nodded slowly, the pieces clicking into place. The audit, the observer, the impossible drill. It was all connected. He walked to the main command terminal. "Computer," he ordered, his voice ringing with authority. "Access service record. Voice authorization Matheson Delta 19er. Search active duty personnel, designation, Spectre," the system word for a moment. Decker let out a short, nervous laugh. "Spectre? Sir, that's just a myth. A ghost story they tell cadets." The laugh died in his throat as a file bloomed onto the main holographic display, visible to everyone in the room. The silence that followed was deeper, heavier, and more absolute than before. The file was sparse, with vast sections blacked out by redactions labeled classification ONYX Echo. But what was visible was enough to steal the breath from every person in the room. The name on the file read, Vance Alara. But it was the lines below that shattered their reality. Unit, Joint Special Operations Command, Strategic Assessment Group 7. A unit so secret, most of them had never even heard of it. Combat hours, classified. Mission history, classified. The next line was a list of medals, a cascade of the highest honors a service member could receive. A Distinguished Service Cross, a Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, a Defense Superior Service Medal. But even that paled in comparison to the final, shocking entry at the top of the file. Rank, General, 010. The word hung in the air, an impossible, undeniable truth. General, a 4-star general. This quiet, unassuming woman in the plain uniform, the woman Decker had publicly ridiculed as a clipboard-carrying clerk, held the highest active-duty rank in the entire armed forces. Colonel Matheson turned away from the screen, his face a mask of solemnity. He faced General Vance, drew himself up to his full height, and executed the sharpest, most profound salute of his entire career. It was not the perfunctory gesture of a subordinate to a superior. It was a salute of genuine, soul-deep reverence. "General Vance," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My apologies for the unprofessional reception you've received on my base." General Vance simply gave him a short, acknowledging nod, accepting his salute and his apology with the same quiet grace she had accepted the insults. She then turned her calm, analytical gaze onto the ashen-faced Captain Decker, who looked as if he had been physically struck. His world, his career, His entire understanding of the chain of command had just been utterly and irrevocably demolished. The architect of the impossible test was standing right in front of him, and he had failed in every conceivable way. The story of what happened in the simulation center spread through the base not like wildfire, but like a shockwave. It traveled in hushed whispers in the mess hall, in coded messages between squadrons, in the stunned silence of the barracks late at night. It became known as the Day of the Ghost, or Decker's demotion, though no official action was ever taken. The public humiliation was a far more potent and lasting punishment than any formal reprimand. Captain Decker was not demoted or reassigned. In a move of what some called cruel genius and others called profound wisdom, General Vance ordered that he remain in his post. He was forced to face the consequences of his arrogance every single day. He had to walk past the same cadets who had laughed at his jokes, now looking at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He had to salute Colonel Matheson, knowing the colonel had witnessed his ultimate failure. Most poignantly, he had to attend daily strategy briefings where a new, permanent plaque was installed on the wall of the main conference room. It was a simple, brushed steel plate, and on it were etched the words, Lesson 1. Assumptions are a liability. Below it was the command string General Vance had used to end the simulation, a permanent monument to his ignorance. Decker changed. The bluster and arrogance were stripped away, layer by painful layer, leaving behind a humbled, quiet, and far more thoughtful officer. He stopped talking and started listening. He was often seen in the base library, late at night, studying strategic theory with a desperate intensity, as if trying to retroactively earn the rank he had so nearly disgraced. He was the living embodiment of the lesson Vance had taught them all, that competence is silent, and arrogance is a deafening admission of insecurity. The legend of General Vance grew, taking on mythic proportions. Some said she wasn't real, that she was a deep-state AI sent to test the limits of human command. Others swore they had seen her, a quiet woman walking the base at night, observing training exercises from the shadows, her presence a constant, invisible reminder of the highest possible standard of professionalism. The secondary diagnostics console she had used in the simulation room was cordoned off. The master sergeant who ran the center declared it off limits, calling it the Spectre Station. Cadets on tour would stop and look at it with a sense of reverence, a holy site in the temple of warfighting. General Vance herself was rarely seen after that day. She didn't need to be. Her single, decisive action had done more to reshape the culture of the base than 100 lectures or 1,000 new regulations. She had held up a mirror, and the reflection had forced a deep and lasting institutional change. The focus shifted from performative leadership to demonstrated skill. Young officers were now judged not by the volume of their commands, but by the clarity of their thinking. The casual hazing and public put-downs that had been a part of the culture began to fade, replaced by a new, shared understanding that you never, ever knew who you were talking to. The quiet professional, the unassuming expert, became the new ideal. The base's readiness scores, the very metric Decker had so arrogantly cited, began to climb, reaching unprecedented levels. They learned to value the quiet ones, the observers, the thinkers, understanding that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal is a well-ordered mind. Her legacy was not in the story they told, but in the new standards they held themselves to. Years later, a new group of bright-eyed cadets stood in the simulation center, listening to a now gray-haired Colonel Matheson. He stood beside the Spectre Station, the keyboard of which was still pristine, untouched since the day General Vance had used it. He didn't tell the cadets the whole story, not the part about Decker's insults or the promotion party. He didn't need to. The legend had refined itself into a purer, more powerful lesson. He told them about a surprise Code Omega drill, an unwinnable scenario designed by a ghost. A myth known only as Spectre. He told them how every commander on the base was paralyzed, how the entire defense network collapsed in minutes under the weight of an impossibly perfect assault. He described how a single operator, using an overlooked and outdated console, had not just defeated the enemy, but had dismantled the entire simulation from the inside out, rewriting the very code of the war game as it was being played. He let the story hang in the air, letting the cadets absorb the sheer scale of such an achievement. Your rank, your insignia, your reputation, Matheson said, his voice low and resonant. Those things are noise. They are assumptions. They are the armor you wear to convince others of your worth. But true competence needs no armor. True strength needs no announcement. It is demonstrated in the silence, in the calm execution of an impossible task. The person standing next to you in the chow line, the one you dismiss as unimportant, might be the one who holds the key to your survival. Remember that. Remember the Spectre. He was teaching them the lesson that General Vance had taught him, the lesson that had become the bedrock of his command. True legacy isn't what you say about yourself. It's the standard that others strive to meet long after you are gone. The cadets stood in complete silence, their faces filled with a new kind of understanding. The story settled into their minds, not as a piece of military folklore, but as a foundational principle. They looked at each other differently, with a dawning respect that went beyond the rank on their collars. The quietest cadet in the group, a young woman who rarely spoke but always scored at the top of her class in strategic analysis, felt a surge of validation. She had always been told her reserved nature was a liability, that she needed to be more aggressive, more commanding. Now she understood. Her silence was not a weakness, it was a discipline. Her calm was not passivity, it was control. The legend of General Vance gave her a new model for leadership, one built on the unshakable foundation of quiet, undeniable competence. The story became a filter through which they viewed their entire careers. Every loud, boastful officer was now suspect. Every quiet, methodical peer was now a potential master. General Vance, in one brief, brilliant afternoon, had inoculated an entire generation of future leaders against the poison of arrogance. She had taught them that respect is a currency earned in moments of crisis, not demanded in moments of pride. Her actions proved that a single, perfect demonstration of skill is worth more than a lifetime of self-promotion. She never returned to that base, but in a way, she never left. Her ghost, her legend, her standard, remained a silent guardian against the kind of institutional blindness that allows ego to triumph over excellence. Her legacy was in the quiet professionalism she had inspired, a ripple effect of competence that would spread through the ranks for decades, strengthening the very core of the service she had dedicated her life to. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines true worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.
I just want to take a moment to say a huge thank you to each and every one of you. Folded hands, your love, support, likes, comments, and subscriptions mean the world to me. Without you, this journey wouldn't be possible. Every view, every share, and every encouraging word keeps me motivated to create more content for you all. I'm truly grateful to have such an amazing community by my side. Let's keep growing together and making this journey even more special. Red Heart.